Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura with Connect My Brain. So glad that you're here. We've been spending some time doing some talking about nutrition, and now we're going to make a little bit of a turn and we are going to talk about stress for a while. So I know it's a word and we kind of use it very easily, but there is so much to it that I'm going to need a few podcasts to really go through. Plus, what I'd really like to do is connect some dots over other things that we've been talking about, such as primitive reflexes, stress and your gut and nutrition, stress and your brain. Because if we put a lot of individual pieces out there and we don't understand the whole body effect, we're kind of missing out on the real story. So I'm really glad that you're here. Let's get comfortable and start to go through. This one will be on some basic ideas, but still going to connect those dots. So, stress is really a physiological event that goes on in our body. When the brain perceives a threat, there is a cascade of chemicals from the body through the adrenals, going up through what's called the hypothalamic pituitary axis. We'll call it HPA, and then involving the reaction in the brain. And this is going on many times before the idea of the threat actually even reaches the frontal lobe, where you have an opportunity to perhaps pause and determine if it's truly a threat or not. Ooh, okay, there's a lot to unpack right there. So before we move through any more physiology, let's connect a few dots. So I've talked to you about primitive reflexes, and I've shared with you that the one that I believe is the enchilada, but I think now more as time goes by, even other reflexes, especially the whole group of withdrawal reflexes, is very important. So let me add a pearl there. If you never listened to anything about the world of reflexes, go back into the podcast and listen to these as well. Your withdrawal reflexes are very early on in pregnancy. And what it's doing is it's priming the nervous system to know how to interpret and respond to a threat. Now, that may just sound ridiculous because what is a little baby going to know about this? But the information behind it is so important because we've got to realize that things have already been laid down in our neurology well before our arrival. And they're going to continue to respond to the new set of stimuli that's out here once we're born. So the withdrawal reflexes prime the nervous system to know how to interpret the threat. And here's this little baby inside of the womb. And what's inside there? Well, it's amniotic fluid. So there might be some rippling effect and some vibration. So we're going to really understand that this is a very light touch influence. And the way you can kind of think about it is, when somebody gets up really close to you, you feel them, even if they're not even touching you. And a lot has to do with the hair on our body, that these are actually receptors. And they are acting like a gazillion little antennas on top of your body, and they're sending in that information. If you're a very sensitive person, you might interpret that as a threat. If you're pretty comfortable in your own skin, you may just go, wow, this person's getting really close to me, but you may not feel the threat. You can also think about the withdrawal reflexes as, or all the reflexes, they do something in the neurology. So, withdrawal is priming your nervous system to know how to respond to a threat, but then it's going to grow up. It's supposed to grow up, mature, and help you handle things so that you can stand back with your executive function and interpret, is it truly a threat or not? The best example of this that I can give you, have you ever been cooking and you burned your arm on a hot pot? You don't sit there and go, wow, my flesh is burning. You recoil, you pull that arm off without even thinking about it. And this is what's meant about being hardwired in our neurology. Think of it as buying a computer with only the hardware. Word's not there, PowerPoint's not there, Excel's not there, but they have the capacity to have the programs loaded on there in order for them to work. So you've got the capacity to have the ability to handle your environment and have some reasonable thoughts to interpret, is this truly a threat or not? Let's connect a dot. Kids on devices, and adults use devices too. And adults play games too. But the difference between the adult and the child is the child is closer to the beginning. The child's in open windows of development. So whatever is being introduced into their environment is literally going to shape the responses as they go forward, especially the first 8.5 years. And I'm also going to include the last trimester of pregnancy, because that's the development of your subconscious mind. If children are involved in different games on devices that have a tendency to fight, bloodshed, wreck cars, all that kind of stuff that just might be a little too much, their brain is literally being set up to not know if this is real or imagined. And that's huge. Okay, so I am not a big device game promoter. I know we live in a world with computers. I'm talking to you over a platform right now. I know there's many benefits to having these devices in our life, but with benefit also comes consequence. And unfortunately, I think a lot of parents, caregivers, even teachers have a tendency to allow a child to be overly entertained by devices versus getting outside and playing, doing something with their hands other than texting or their thumbs. This is not fine motor control. And for my podcast audience, I am literally mimicking my thumbs as though I'm holding a device and clicking on something. So we've even changed how the motor skills are going to develop in the hands, which initially we start off with this raking motion of the last three fingers and eventually go to the pincer grip, which is the thumb and the index finger. When I do a child developmental assessment, I'm always looking at handwriting. And I'm not just looking at what comes on the paper, I'm looking at how they're holding their writing instrument. And I can tell you, especially over the last couple of years, you hardly see any kids able to get into a comfortable pincer grip, which for my, I'm going to put it on video. That instrument should be able to lay in the hand, not hold it like squeezing with three fingers and then trying to write. Again, that's an adaptation. It's not a true development of the pincer grip. It should lay comfortably on the hand controlled by the index and the thumb. So if your child has handwriting issues, that could very well be part of the issue. The other part that could have created that is that they didn't crawl or they had an atypical crawl. When we get into our hands, when we're crawling, we literally are developing the arch in our hand. And again, if you're just listening to this over a podcast, please go back over to YouTube, Dr. Laura Hanson. That's where I take all of the podcasts and load them up so that you can see video as well. So now we've talked about the withdrawal setup. This is something that's very early primed into our nervous system. Now, if during our pregnancy there's heightened levels of stress for whatever reason, over the last 3 years, there have been loss of jobs. There's been loss of community. There's been greater fear laid down. What does the future look like? There's been mandates and forced medical decisions to keep employment, walking around just truly not knowing anything that's going on. And if you were pregnant during this time, you could have felt a lot of those things and impacted the reaction for the baby. You know, they used to advocate that mom was basically like an incubator and that things didn't touch the baby. And it was only certain blood types that they were more concerned with. And today we know that's absolutely not true. This is only receptors that try to keep communication in the womb at a certain homeostatic level, but receptors can fail. And we can absolutely have a mix. In fact, over time, if mom is very stressed, then she can even rob cortisol from her baby through the umbilical cord. And in the 80s, they started really looking at a lot of research trying to find answers. Why are we having so many children labeled autistic? Where the numbers have been going statistically at a much higher level. Today, it is quantified 1 in 10 kids. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that they were saying 1 in 200. Now, I'll be honest with you, those numbers were lower even then, but there's certain things that have to get caught up before people will actually give you accurate statistics. But it's even being said today that it's 1 in 10. This is horrifying to think that we have this many children whose lives are going to be so impacted. Brown University did a study and said that children born during the virus fear state had a likelihood of more than 20% cognitive decline. We need to take this information very seriously. And then on top of it all, CDC went in and started changing milestones. You can't just make a decision like that when developmentally it's completely unsound. They're indicating now that you could be 18 months before you walk. And the only reason that this is happening is so people aren't getting services earlier. And we're certainly not going to blame it on anything so that no one else has to be held accountable. I assure you, it's like functional lab work. They go in with traditional labs and change the within normal limits every year based on who took the test, gender, age, etc. And they just keep changing. So someone goes in feeling a certain way, gets to use their insurance card, gets the lab work done, and finds out, oh no, you're normal. Everything's fine. And meanwhile, they don't feel that way. And the easiest way to approach health issues is as early on as you possibly can. I'm working with a woman who is now in her 70s and has been dealing with health issues for over 2 decades. And it is now just one layer after another, after another. And that is so much harder to unravel than when you do feel something. Functional medicine gets at the root cause, stays with the biochemistry of the body, not based on a decision that an organization has made. We've decided to change this, but rather what truly reflects health. The earlier you get into your child's development, the easier it is to move that pendulum in a different direction. Stress is a big deal. It's a big deal before you conceive your baby, while you're pregnant. When they looked at all this research, the thing that they really found, the number one thing that was influencing the changing outcomes for children from positive to negative, was a mother suffering a loss during her pregnancy. Well, I just listed out several possibilities, but of course, it's losing a loved one. It could be losing the dream of how you really wanted your family life to come together. So if this is part of your background, please take that next step, check yourself out, and check your child out. So if we move along from withdrawal reflexes and get into the primitive reflexes, the only one I want to highlight again, and you can go back to the podcast titled World of Reflexes for deeper information. But the Moro reflex is our transition from the withdrawal reflexes into the primitive reflexes. And the Moro reflex activates arousal, CO2, O2 reflex, and your sympathetic nervous system. This comes on board 9 weeks of pregnancy. That baby has its own capacity now to have its fight or flight. And the word that I want to underline for you is transition. So I see a lot of times on histories, my child has a really hard time going from one place to another, transitioning. This is how we can tie back the state of autonomic balance for that child, as well as for the adult. If we can measure the stress response and see if that stress response is in a chronic state, we can help you understand why perhaps now your bucket has been filled, and this last event, whatever that last event is, has now caused that bucket to tip over. I can have people, especially early on in my chiropractic life, that they would say, I had this car accident, and after that, everything just went haywire. And it probably wasn't just the car accident, but rather how full that bucket really is. And that's one of the points that I'd really like to connect the dots today on, is the allostatic load that people are carrying around. So, what's in your bucket? And if you were to sit down and write out the significant events in your life, and I would put it from a mechanical model, your body. I would put it a chemical framework. What's your health state? Do you know your health state? Do you know what I mean by health state? I ask pregnant moms, or in the history, what was your health state? And they go, well, I felt great. Feelings are feelings. They are not evidence that tells us what your health state was when you actually conceived your baby. Or perhaps this has nothing to do with childbirth, pregnancy. Perhaps you're an individual and you feel like everything is great. Feelings are feelings, and they're very important. But lots of times we don't really get symptoms until something has been around for a very long time. In fact, the top 6 issues are autoimmune, endocrine, diabetes, depression, obesity, and cancer. Those are the top 6 pathologies. Now, we could sit here all day and list out all the things that are under autoimmune, under endocrine. One of the ones that is showing up quite frequently is dysautonomia symptoms. So let's break it down. DYS, has to do with dysfunction. Autonomia has to do with the autonomic nervous system. So if I read it to you simply as a definition, dysautonomia is a disorder of the autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system is your autopilot. You don't tell your heart to beat. You don't tell your stomach to digest, eliminate. You don't tell your ovaries to produce the egg, etc. This is automatic. And what dysautonomia impacts is the function of the autonomic nervous system. Now, I want to read to you, it'll take me a second, but I want to read to you symptoms that are involved in this. Difficulty standing upright, fainting, aches, muscles, cramps, chest pain, visual disturbances, ice pick pain, weakness, migraines, red eye, focus issues, sleep issues, dilated pupils, dizziness, diarrhea, irregular heartbeat, GI issues, your stomach, low blood pressure, appetite swings, fatigue, tremors, excessive thirst, poor memory, inability to relax, erectile dysfunction, vertigo, focus, concentration issues, fast or slow heartbeat, nausea, difficulty breathing, disorientation, mood swings, anxiety, temperature regulation issues, poor appetite, respiratory difficulties, exercise intolerance. That's quite the list. And I would imagine, I would venture to say that almost everybody listening to this podcast is going to say, well, I've got a few of those. I don't think it's a difficult situation to believe after the last 3 years and the impact of those 3 years. We might sign a bill and say it's over, but there's been a tsunami of impact on people, on their well-being, on their health, on their mind. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to get into the idea of stress, because the good old-fashioned human American way or human way is we're going to plow through. And sometimes when we're plowing through, we're missing those very small, subtle signs like, has your focus changed? Has your vision changed? Has your breathing changed? Has your body changed? Remember, we said this is a mechanical, it's a chemical, it's a brain. We can hear all three of those categories in that list of symptoms. And so, what it means is that we've lost the balance between sympathetics and parasympathetics. One of the most powerful tools is breathing correctly. So, one of the things when we do our stress response test, we are looking at the vitals. We're looking at heart rate variability, we're looking at heart rate, skin conduction, temperature, respiration, and muscle tone, just like you heard in that list. We're able to see the patterns that the individual, child and adult, and it is very important. Again, the earlier that we start, we're going to be able to help that child move back to balance. I just don't want to leave the adults out. Last night we did a community dinner at the office. And if you're ever interested, we do them. I think it's like the second Wednesday of each month. We're going to do it in May. We'll do it in June. And then we're going to take July off, and then we'll be back in August. We used to do this all the time prior to the virus, and it was great to get back to that last night. And I had the pleasure of talking to a lovely group of women. And it was not only their children that they were considering and thinking about, but it was themselves. The most powerful thing that we could ever do is strengthen ourselves as a parent, especially in today's times. We've got to lead our children. We've got to have that strength so that we can help our children stand the test of time. It is so easy to dismiss this idea of stress and not really understand the impact that it has. But if it can dysregulate your autonomic system and create all these different symptoms, which again are going to lead to a mountain of other systems. Let's just look at breathing. That breathing pattern is so powerful. In fact, it's what we talk about, especially in biofeedback. So biofeedback is working on the body's vitals. And this, I believe, is what really launched this work in neurofeedback, because we know the body has an innate ability to reset itself through breathing correctly. When we breathe correctly, that diaphragm at the base of the rib cage gets pulled down and literally is opening up the lungs. And you have these alveolar sacs. It's like a sponge. And this is where oxygen is just popping into those holes. So if I have a dysregulation in my breathing, I'm not taking that full, what you know as a diaphragmatic breath. I'm typically staying up here in my shoulders. Therefore, I'm not getting enough oxygen. Remember what I said, connected dot to the Moro reflex. Moro reflex is going to grow up. So not just your baby, but you. It's going to go to the adult startle. And if you're not getting enough oxygen, this is going to create a pH problem in your body. You will have more fatigue. So when we practice that breath and think about the rib cage all the way around our torso, so that when we breathe, and we pull that diaphragm down, what's on the front of that spine is the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is connected from your brain all the way down to every single organ of your body. Now, for the little baby, let's connect the dot. If little babies are born by cesarean section, if they are a breech presentation, if they get stuck, there's an area in the back of the brain called the occiput. This is your visual cortex. When you're a newborn, that occiput is actually in 4 separate pieces. Now, go over, make sure you look at the video. So this would be one side, this would be the other side. What's right here in the middle is your brainstem. This is your arousal system, your sleep-wake cycle, which will eventually mature to you being able to pay attention. But what's between the lateral or the outside piece and the inside piece is your vagus nerve, along with 2 other cranial nerves. It has 9, 10, and 11 cranial nerves. So if this piece doesn't go through a typical birth delivery, oftentimes it can get stuck, and it can literally be what causes colic in the baby. And so now the baby, in its open window of development, is literally practicing irritability. Let's connect that dot. That can become a very unhappy little toddler. That can be a child that can't transition well. That can be a child that is just emotionally dysregulated. It's a very powerful component of human physiology is to be able to breathe the correct way. And when we come into this world, if you have a newborn baby, lay it down and look at that little belly. It rises and falls. It's innate. We were designed that way. And it's important that we keep it. This is a way that we can learn to self-regulate. Now, what I'd like to do is wrap up today by talking about the brain. We've talked about the mechanical pieces, what some of these reflexes might impart into the development of the child, what it might mean for you as an adult with tight shoulders all the time, hunched up posture, never really feeling 100%. We've talked about the chemistry, primarily about oxygen. But if you are in chronic stress, you are burning through anything that you're supposed to be getting from your food. If you don't know your state of health, you don't know if you need additional support, like on that MTHFR. We've talked about that in a previous podcast. But what about the brain with chronic stress? If this isn't enough to entice you to stay with us each and every week and learn more about what this does to our body, and more importantly, what you can do, then I am not doing a great job. And I hope I'm doing a great job. When you are in chronic stress and you're an open window of development, our babies, that stress response that raises the heart rate, increases the breath rate, shifts blood from the front of the brain to the back of the brain, sends blood to the arms and legs because it believes there's a threat, and do I need to run or fight? And even little babies can look like they are pulling away and fighting. Or is this you as an adult? Are you constantly feeling on edge? When we stay in this state, we are changing the physiology for every vital organ of our body. Now, for the adult, let me lay this one down. Let's say in your past, you played football, played tennis, played the piano, played the violin. Perhaps you were really great building things. But because life happens, that's one of our favorite little words, right? I got to work. I got to do this. There's so much stress. There's um, inflation. I can't. You've been practicing the I can't pattern. And this isn't judgment. So don't take it that way. We've all been under a lot of stress, but I've got to be part of the solution and waking us up because we've got to care for ourselves. If you have been practicing the I can't, I won't, it's impossible for me to do mentality, and you're now to a place, either you've been thinking about it or you're to the place where you go, enough's enough. I got to do something. You do. And you're going to have to go the other direction with the same kind of intensity that you got to this position in order to turn it around. So I like to refer to this as the hamster on the wheel. If you've just been in that pattern over and over and over again, does the hamster ever really get anywhere? No. It's just more stress. It's more damage. But here's the enchilada to this part. Those wonderful things that you did in the past and the nerve patterns, the connections that you made, if you stay in a chronic state of stress, your brain goes, well, you don't want to play the piano anymore. You don't want to play tennis anymore. You don't want to build things anymore. You just want to be in this stress pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all those fabulous connections that you had, and I'm going to convert them over to the real estate of living in stress. Wow. Can you see the dot connected that if we stay in this state, the risk of neurodegenerative symptoms is right around the corner? Well, what does that mean? Neurodegenerative, neuroimmune. So meaning your immune system can impact brain function. Your I can't hamster wheel mentality and taking all of your great neural connections to continue with stress, you will degenerate your brain and age much faster. Okay, so what can we do? Especially go look over at the video. So what I want you to do is just start breathing. I want you to put a hand on a chest and a hand on a belly. I want you to sit comfortable in a chair. And I want you just to realize, become aware. Do you breathe deeply? Do you feel that bottom hand go out rather than just shoulders going up? Shoulder movement is a reaction of stress. We do that to protect our neck. We do it innately. We've got to keep the shoulders down. I should be able to take a breath and my shoulders never move. And I should feel it in the backside, on my back, pressing into whatever it is that I'm sitting in. If you can accomplish this, just watch. You might get a little lightheaded because you may not have breathed this way in a while. So just 30 seconds every day until the next podcast, and we're going to build on what we can do. Now, if you're ready, say, no, you know what? I want some help. I'm ready to get myself checked out. I'm ready to get my child checked out. I want to know if my brain is in chronic stress. I want to know if my child is on target. I want to know these things so that I can take care of them right now. Then it's time for you to go over to the website, connectmybrain.com, send me a message. Tell me when you're available so that we can minimize how much back and forth to schedule a call. Call the office 678 501 5172. We're building an army of strength over here. There's always hope and there's always results when you come to Connect My Brain. Thanks for tuning in today. Be blessed.